Greetings, ladies and gentlemen and fellow Kenyans. Welcome back to Lifelens TV. I'm your host, Peter Tosh Williams. Please consider subscribing. You know, there's this recurring theme I've been observing for quite some time, and it's something worth discussing. It's the way we, as people, tend to develop an almost automatic dislike, dare I say hate, towards those in power, regardless of their performance or intentions. And this isn't just a Kenyan issue, this happens everywhere. Today I want to unpack this programmed hate we see towards William Ruto and draw parallels to other leaders like the late John Pombe Magufuli, Mwai Kibaki, Uhuru Kenyatta, and even leaders in global history. Because here's the thing, it's not really about bad leadership, accountability, or the economy. It goes deeper than that. It's almost like a natural outcome of being in power. Why power attracts hate? Well, let's start with this basic truth. Anyone who gets to the top will, without fail, face immense criticism. And I'm not talking about constructive criticism. I'm talking about people who will, no matter what, find fault in everything you do. Look at Ruto today. No matter what he does, people are out here saying, he's failing us. They're saying, he's made everything worse. And yet, when you take a step back and look at the facts, it's not all doom and gloom. Take, for instance, the cost of basic commodities. Just last year, people were in the streets, protesting over the high price of maize flour, unga. It was the center of every conversation, every protest. But now, prices have come down, in some cases by almost 50%. You'd think this would be enough to calm the waters, right? But no, now they're saying, unga sio kitu ya maana. Really? The same thing you were demonstrating about last year is suddenly no longer a big deal? This just goes to show it's not about what Ruto or any leader does. It's the fact that he's the one in power, and power always comes with this burden of resentment. People are quick to turn against those in power, even if they're working to fix the very issues people complained about. Now let's talk about something significant that President William Ruto has been able to achieve, yet no one seems to notice it because of the prevailing negativity and hate. Take, for instance, the value of the Kenyan shilling against the US dollar. We all know how crucial a strong currency is for any nation's economy. When William Ruto took office, the exchange rate stood at a staggering 166 Kenya shillings to the dollar. That was a heavy burden on the economy. But here we are today, just a short time later, and the shilling has strengthened. Right now, the exchange rate is 128 Kenya shillings to the dollar. That's a massive improvement. It's a clear sign of economic stabilization, but do you hear anyone talking about it? No. People aren't finding it meaningful. Instead, they dig deeper into his faults, trying to criticize him. They're even going as far back as 2018, bringing up projects he launched when he was deputy president, which were never funded due to political tensions. You see, during Uhuru Kenyatta's presidency, there was a political battle, especially after the infamous handshake with Raila Odinga. Raila was Uhuru's preferred candidate for the 2022 elections, and Ruto was essentially sidelined. The government refused to fund those projects to deny Ruto credit before the public.
At the heart of the conflict is the Executive Order No. 1 of 2019 that restructured government and established the National Development Implementation and Communication Cabinet Committee, chaired by Matiang'i, with 7 key functions, top among them provision of supervisory leadership throughout the delivery cycle of all national government programs and projects.
Now Mwai Kibaki is going around the country exposing these stalled projects, and people are buying into it, without considering the bigger picture. They don't stop to ask why those projects weren't funded in the first place. Of course, now that Ruto is president, the next question is, why hasn't he initiated these projects again? Well, here's the thing. Every administration comes in with a new budget. You can't just flip a switch and fund projects immediately. It takes time to reallocate resources and bring old projects into the new regime's priorities. But instead of acknowledging the complexities, people jump straight into criticism. With this context, let's take a closer look at those who are vocal critics today. Leaders like Mwai Kibaki, Samuel Makura, and others who are seen as the people's champions. Even those who are most vocal right now, challenging President William Ruto, have this aura of being loved by the people. Take Mwai Kibaki, for instance. People see him as the one who resonates with their struggles. He's out there exposing government-stalled projects and people appreciate him for it. In fact, they've even gone as far as fundraising for him to buy a sound system for his tours across the country, spreading civic education. He's become a symbol of hope for many, just like Samuel Makur, the perceived Gen Z leader, or even personalities like Eric Omondi and Babu Owino, the Embakasi East MP. But here's the irony. If any one of them were to ascend to power, say one of them became president, they would almost immediately become the enemy of the people. The same people who fundraised for Mwai Kibaki, who sang praises for Samuel Makur, would turn against them. Why? Because no president, no matter how well-meaning, ever lives up to the people's expectations. It's not that these leaders would necessarily fail, but because the people's expectations are always shifting, always growing. No matter how much you give, it's never enough. Human wants are endless. You can feed people directly into their mouths, but they'll still complain that the spoon you're using isn't good enough. Take Donald Trump, for example. When he was in office, people couldn't wait to vote him out. They hated him. They wanted change. So they voted in Joe Biden, their new darling. But now look. Those same people who celebrated Biden's win are calling him the worst president. Suddenly, Trump seems like the better option again. It's the same cycle repeating itself, where the new leader becomes the target of public frustration. And this brings me to one of the most notable examples we've seen in Africa, a leader whose story mirrors this exact pattern. Now let's shift a bit and talk about Tanzania's late president, John Pombe Magufuli. By most accounts, Magufuli was one of the best presidents not just in Africa, but arguably in the world during his tenure. The man was tough on corruption, he brought infrastructure projects to life, and he drastically improved healthcare in Tanzania. Yet, even with all that, there were still people who hated him. Magufuli himself once said something that stuck with me. "They will remember me when I am gone." In fact, here is the tape.
Mimi sitaki nipendwe sana. Hata sura yangu ni mbaya. Mimi nataka kama ni wa kunipenda mnipende kwa ajili ya kazi. Kama mnataka kunichukia mnichukie kwa ajili ya kazi. Lakini nataka niwaambie ndugu zangu wa Ukerewe na wa Tanzania kwa ujumla. Kwa haya tunayoyafanya, matokeo yake siku moja mtakuja kuzungumza alikuwepo hapa.
And you don't even have to look far for other examples. Remember Mwai Kibaki. When Kibaki was in office, people had plenty to say about him. Some even called him hands-off because of his quiet style of leadership. People complained about the economy, about corruption under his watch, about everything. But today, go around and ask people about Kibaki. You'll hear things like, "Oh, Kibaki was one of the best presidents we ever had." The very same people who criticized him in office now miss him. Then there's Uhuru Kenyatta. During his last term, people nicknamed him Wanjohi Kuniwa, basically mocking his alleged love for a good drink and his casual dressing style. We all remember the protests, the accusations of the cost of living being unbearable, corruption scandals left and right. But now people are saying, "We miss Uhuru. At least under Uhuru, things were better." It's almost funny because it's like we have a collective amnesia when it comes to leaders. The same people we vilify in office become heroes once they're out. And let me tell you, this phenomenon isn't just limited to East Africa. Think about Winston Churchill, one of the most iconic leaders of the 20th century. After leading Britain through World War II, he was voted out of office almost immediately. Imagine that. The man literally saved his country, and yet once the war was over, people wanted him gone. It's only later, in hindsight, that he was appreciated as one of history's great leaders. Even here in Kenya, we see a similar pattern playing out. Leaders like Daniel Arap Moi, who ruled for over 2 decades, were despised by many at the time. But years after he left, you still find some Kenyans nostalgically referring to Moi's era as simpler times. So what's really going on here? I think part of it is human nature. When someone's in power, they're a convenient target for all our frustrations. The economy goes down? Blame the president. Corruption? Blame the president. Even things that are outside of their control get placed squarely on their shoulders. We as humans like having a scapegoat. It's easier to direct our anger at a single person than to think about the complex, systemic issues behind our problems. And when that person is no longer in power, we suddenly become more forgiving, almost nostalgic, because the new person in power becomes the new target. And of course, we can't ignore tribalism and political loyalty. There are people who will never support Ruto, not because of his policies or his performance, but because of the political and tribal alliances they belong to. This kind of blind loyalty means that no matter what Ruto does, no matter how much he fixes, those people will always find something to criticize. In the end, it's not about leadership, accountability, or the economy, it's about power. Power naturally attracts resentment, and this pattern we're seeing with Ruto, it's the same pattern we saw with Magufuli, with Kibaki, with Uhuru, and with countless leaders throughout history. It's almost like a program, something ingrained in us, to turn against the person in power until they're gone. Only then do we start to realize the good they did. So whether Ruto fixes the economy, builds roads, or brings about reforms, there will always be those who resist, criticize, and even hate. But when the dust settles and a new leader takes over, those same critics might just find themselves saying, you know what? Ruto wasn't so bad after all. And that's the irony of leadership. You only truly get appreciated when you're no longer in office. And there you have it, folks. The hate we see towards William Ruto or any other leader is often less about the actual issues and more about the position they hold. It's a cycle, a programmed response that will play out again and again. But in the end, history will be the judge, and like those before him, Ruto may find himself looked back on with far more kindness than he's receiving today. If you found this discussion insightful, make sure to give this video a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, Lifelens TV, for more in-depth political analysis and conversations that make you think. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. And of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. Drop a comment below. Do you agree that the hate towards any president is inevitable, or do you think there's more to it? Let's have that conversation in the comments. Until next time, remember, the power belongs to the people. I've been your host, Peter Tosh Williams, and goodbye for now, Africa.